You hear the sizzle? I can't stop eating it. Good things are happening. Welcome back to my kitchen. Let's get into some home cooking. Today I'm making my favorite spinach and cheese phyllo pie. It's such a fun dish to make and it's the centerpiece of a meal. I love to serve it for brunch, but it's great for dinner, for breakfast, and on the go. So the ingredients for the dish are spinach, dill, mozzarella cheese, Parmesan, feta, phyllo dough, garlic, sesame seeds, egg, salt, pepper, and olive oil. The first step is to cook the spinach, and we're gonna do that on the stovetop. I like to cook this on medium. I'm putting in about a tablespoon of olive oil. There's no overcooking or undercooking the spinach here because it'll cook again in the oven. We just want to try to get out as much of the liquid as possible. As soon as I see that the spinach is starting to wilt, I'm just gonna push it over to one side of the pan, and I'll keep on adding the remainder of the spinach. Once the spinach is ready, I'm going to put it on a colander so that we can strain out the liquid and so it cools down. So I like to kind of push the spinach up the sides of the colander, and this way there'll be more surface area for it to cool down and to drain. Okay, so I'm gonna set it aside and we'll get started on chopping the dill. We wanna make sure it's nicely finely chopped so it can be well dispersed within the pie. The smell of freshly chopped dill, it might be one of my favorite smells. If I ever make a candle, it's gonna smell like fresh herbs. I would say if you know, you know, but if you don't know, you definitely should check out my first episode. We talk all about my love of herbs. Okay, the spinach is cooled down, and just to be extra safe, we're gonna drain the liquid out with our hands. We're doing this to make sure that the pie is not soggy and it stays nice and crispy. It's important to chop the spinach. This way, when you cut up the pie, the pieces will be nice and clean and you won't have any stranglers. Straddlers. When you're trying to chop something like this, you could put your hand on the top of the knife and kind of rock again and you'll get nice control. Okay, so I'm gonna lift it and hopefully have no stragglers. You can make this filling with any other hearty green. It works with Swiss chard or kale. In the summertime, I actually love to use fresh corn. I'm using 3 types of cheese: shredded mozzarella, some grated parm, and of course, some feta cheese. I love to use the store-bought block, and I crumble it on my own. I find that it's much more fresh and I can control the sizes. I love using feta because the cheese doesn't really melt into the filling once it's cooked, so you can tell there's cheese in there, and it's also salty and it's pretty classic. There's a lot of versions of this recipe around the world, like spanakopita or burekas, and this is my take on it. Now we'll add the dill. It adds a really nice herbaceous flavor. And I add some grated garlic. This is really nice for kind of allium flavor. I use 2 garlic cloves because my husband is a garlic girl. I'll add 2 teaspoons of salt here, and then we'll give it a taste. Sometimes different feta cheeses have different salinity levels, and this way we don't need to have any surprises at the table. I always prefer to use freshly ground pepper. It's much more flavorful and pungent, and it just takes a moment. I'm gonna start with a spoon, and then I like to kind of go in with my hands. This way I make sure everything is bound and will allow us to have less of a mess during assembly. It's so important to feel your food. Okay, so the filling is feeling like it's ready. Let's get into assembly. Welcome back into my magically clean kitchen. Now it's time for phyllo dough. Phyllo dough is a dough that's really thin. As soon as you mix it with butter or olive oil and you bake it in the oven, it crisps up and it becomes so flaky, and it's pretty forgiving to work with. Even if you get a straggler or any tears, it's fine because it's just more crispy edges. To make sure they don't dry out during the assembly process, I like to cover it with a damp kitchen cloth. A little blanket, tuck it into bed. I'm using a round baking pan, enamelware of course, but you can use any springform pan or cake pan, just as long as it's between 10 to 12 inches. I'm just gonna use olive oil here because I'm using that in the recipe. And I'll start by taking 2 sheets of phyllo dough, So it's more traditional to take one sheet of phyllo dough at a time and put olive oil in between. But I found that it doesn't really make a big difference, so I'm just gonna go ahead and take 2 sheets of phyllo dough and just brush the top layer with olive oil, and we'll move on. I actually like to just drizzle it. This way the brush won't drag the phyllo dough. And just to tell you what the olive oil does here, okay, this is another nerd alert. Once the phyllo dough is cooking in the oven, there will be steam that's created from the olive oil, and that's what will kind of elevate the flaky phyllo dough pieces.
What's that called?
It's called evaporation. Evaporation. I'm so happy I get to show this to you because it's kind of hard to write this out in a recipe, so thank you for being here today. I'm gonna take a few scoops of the filling and I'll add it into the side of the phyllo dough that's closest to me. I like to just use my hands to put it together into a log form because that's how we will roll the phyllo dough, and then we're gonna create a beautiful spiral shape in the pan, which allows there to be extra edges of crispy, flaky phyllo dough. And now I'll take the bottom edge of the phyllo dough, both layers, and we'll just roll it up just like that. This phyllo dough is so nice and tender because we defrosted it properly and we covered it with a damp paper towel, so this way it's not tearing. Look how beautiful that is. And it's important to remember where the seam side is because now when we put it into the pan, we'll put it seam side down to make sure it stays together. Okay, let's get started on the second one. This is such a fun dish to make with kids. I love to get my daughters involved. It's just a nice project and it's fun to kind of invite people over for brunch, put this together, have a drink, and then carry on. So you'll see that we're starting to create a spiral shape as we build it in, and this is why I like to use a circular pan. It will take around 6 to 8 logs of the phyllo dough with the spinach filling to create the perfect spiral shape. We take this edge and we connect it with that one. We just push it around. You don't have to be too gentle with this dough. It'll kind of give and take to wherever you want to move it. And all these little crimped edges are going to be so crisp. Just everything is going to be good. Good things are happening. Check it out. This dish just transports me to my childhood. I spent my summers in Tel Aviv. We would go to the shuk and have freshly made burekas with spinach or with potatoes, grated tomatoes, and soft-boiled eggs. It was so fun as a kid. It's a very satisfying thing to eat. Okay, so we're up to the final piece of the puzzle. I'm just gonna make a spiral that starts from here and ends inside. So I like to just do this as the log is on the pan, and I'll put it into position and just roll it up from this end. Ta-da! It teared and that's totally fine. It'll be just as delicious. And here we go, we tuck it in. We'll top off the pie with some egg wash. This makes sure that the crust will be really nice and glossy. And the final touch is to sprinkle the top with sesame seeds. Once the pie bakes, you'll see that the sesame seeds are still white and the pie is golden, so it's a nice contrast. But also, the sesame seeds give a really nice nutty flavor to the finish. I cook it for 45 minutes to an hour on 350 degrees, and I love to serve the pie in this dish. It makes everything easy, oven to table, if you shall. It looks so good. Wow. Okay, so the spinach pie is all ready. Check her out. So golden and glossy on top, and I can see it's really nice and crispy. Here's everything I like to serve with it. We have a 7-minute soft-boiled egg, freshly grated tomatoes, and an assortment of pickles. It's really nice and bright and adds a zing to the dish. So we're gonna cut into the pie. I love to use a serrated knife for this. It's gonna make sure that the slices are nice and clean. You can hear all the layers of crisp and you can see all the flakes. It's really paper thin. It's so nice. I feel like phyllo dough is also a very delicate kind of crust to pie, and it works so well with the tender, creamy filling that we have. All right, let's do it. You see how creamy the filling is, all the melted mozzarella, and the spinach is still there. And you can also see the rings of the phyllo dough logs and just how beautifully crisp it is.
Tell us your ideal plate.
I like to add a soft-boiled egg, a pickle, these are my favorite, and of course I love grated tomatoes. I just put a nice dollop next to the pie. Okay, here's the dream plate. Let's taste it. I'm gonna dip it into the tomatoes. The filling is still warm. The spinach is cooked and tender. I get the saltiness from the feta and the Parmesan, and the mozzarella just like stretches in between. It's such an amazing dish. It's so hearty and fun. You gotta try this. You'll thank me later. Let's just finish with a pickle.